It was a bright, crisp morning in the heart of the city, where the royal palace stood proudly, its walls filled with history and tradition. The day had arrived for an important ceremony, an event that drew the attention of citizens from all walks of life. People lined the streets eagerly awaiting the royal procession. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation. The streets were alive with the sound of marching bands, the fluttering of flags, and the occasional sound of horses' hooves against the cobblestones. Among the sea of faces in the crowd, one person stood out. He wasn't as young as most of the people around him. His back was slightly hunched from age, and his face was weathered with years of experience filled with stories of the past. The man was a veteran, someone who had seen the horrors of war, lost comrades, and lived through days that most could never even imagine. But today he wasn't focused on the past. He had come to witness the ceremony, an event that meant something deep within his heart. His uniform, though faded, still carried the insignia of his service, a reminder of the years he spent in the military. As the royal guard began to march in formation, the veteran's eyes sparkled with pride. These were the people who stood watch over the nation, protecting the monarchy with unwavering dedication. He remembered when he was young, when he too had stood like that, rigid and unmoving, proud to serve. The sight brought a wave of memories flooding back, a mixture of both joy and pain. The joy of serving his country, and the pain of the friends he had lost along the way, soldiers who never made it back home. It was during the ceremony that the veteran's emotions began to take over him. The weight of his memories, the years that had passed, and the faces of the soldiers he had fought alongside, started to push through the walls he had built around his heart. His eyes, which had been fixed on the royal guards, grew blurry with unshed tears. He tried to hide it, thinking that perhaps no one would notice, but the tears kept coming, one after another. His hand moved up to his face, wiping them away quickly, hoping no one saw. But he couldn't stop them. The emotions he had kept locked away for so long began to surface in that moment. The veteran's heart ached as he thought of the war. The faces of the soldiers who had fallen, the ones who never came back. He remembered their smiles, their courage, and how they had shared everything: hopes, fears, laughter, and sometimes silence. The bond that formed during those challenging times was something that couldn't be explained to anyone who hadn't lived it. The memories were bittersweet. He missed his friends terribly, but he was also thankful for the time they had spent together. The loss of so many had never been easy, and as the years passed, the pain of their absence never truly went away. Around him, the crowd continued to cheer and clap, unaware of the storm of emotions swirling inside the veteran. He didn't mind the noise, though. It was normal for people to celebrate such occasions. The world around him was full of life, yet inside he was struggling. Each cheer felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. He had become a man shaped by his past, and now, even though the ceremony was for the living, a part of him felt disconnected from it all. But amidst his silent tears, something happened. A shift in the air, a change that was barely noticeable to those around him, but to him it was clear. As he wiped away another tear, he felt a presence nearby, something that made him pause. His gaze slowly turned toward the royal guard standing just a few paces away, keeping a steady and watchful eye on the crowd. The guard was perfectly still, his uniform crisp, his face expressionless. His job was clear. He was there to protect, to stand guard, and to uphold the tradition. Yet as the veteran looked into the guard's eyes, he saw something more, something he didn't expect. The guard's gaze softened for just a moment, and the veteran could sense it. It wasn't just a look of duty, but one of understanding. It was as if the guard knew exactly what he was feeling, knew the pain that came with being a soldier, knew the weight of loss. The veteran's heart skipped a beat, and for a brief second he felt as though someone truly understood him. It was a silent connection, but it was there, and it was stronger than anything the veteran had felt in a long time. The guard didn't speak, didn't move. He simply stood, unflinching and silent, but the small gesture, the softening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in his stance, spoke volumes. It was as if the guard was offering his silent support, acknowledging the pain the veteran had carried for so long. The veteran took a deep breath, feeling a sense of comfort in that brief exchange, even if it was just for a moment. He had not expected it. After all, this was a royal guard, someone whose life was dedicated to the kingdom, someone whose job was to stand still and remain stoic, regardless of the emotions swirling around them. Yet there was something in the way the guard held himself, something in the way he acknowledged the veteran's silent suffering. It was a simple act, but it meant the world to the veteran. He didn't need words. In that moment, the guard's silent understanding was enough. It reminded him that no matter how much time passed, he wasn't truly alone in his memories. There were others who understood. And so, amidst the grand ceremony with all its pomp and circumstance, the veteran found a quiet moment of connection, a connection not made through words but through the unspoken bond of those who had served. It was a moment that would stay with him long after the crowd had dispersed, long after the royal guards had returned to their posts. The memory of the guard's silent recognition would forever be etched in his heart, a reminder that sometimes, even in the most public of places, we can find a moment of pure human understanding. As the ceremony continued, the veteran wiped away the last of his tears, feeling a little lighter. He stood a little taller, his chest swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. It wasn't the royal procession, nor the royal guard that had moved him so deeply. It was the simple, silent act of kindness from one soldier to another, a gesture that transcended the years and bridged the gap between them. The veteran knew that in the end it was not the medals or the uniforms that mattered most. It was the shared experiences, the shared sacrifices, and the unspoken bonds that would always be remembered. The moment the veteran and the royal guard locked eyes, something shifted. The ceremony around them, filled with music, cheers, and the rustling of flags, seemed to fade into the background. It was as if time had slowed for just a moment, leaving only the two of them in that brief silent connection. The veteran, who had been struggling to hold back his emotions, felt a sense of relief wash over him. The guard's gaze, even though unspoken, had offered him something precious: understanding. In that instant, the veteran knew that this young guard wasn't just a soldier standing at attention, following orders and fulfilling his duty. No, there was something deeper in the guard's expression, something that made the veteran feel seen, heard, and, most importantly, understood. The guard hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, yet his eyes told the veteran that he wasn't alone in the sea of strangers surrounding him. In that brief moment, the guard had silently acknowledged his pain, his loss, and his journey. For a veteran, especially one who had lived through the horrors of war, the feeling of being understood was rare. Most people couldn't truly comprehend the experiences of those who had served in combat. It wasn't because they didn't care, but because they hadn't lived through the same hardships. The veteran had come to terms with this long ago. Over time, he had learned to keep his feelings hidden, tucked away in a part of his heart that no one would ever be able to access. He'd grown used to the distance he felt from the world around him. The world had moved on, but his memories, his experiences remained. Yet here, in this moment, this young royal guard had given him something that he hadn't expected: a glimpse of recognition. The guard's stance, his unwavering posture, had not wavered, but in his eyes was something else. It wasn't just professionalism or duty. It was empathy. The veteran, in all his years of service, had seen that kind of understanding before, but never in someone so young. The guard didn't have to say a word. The veteran could see it in his face. The recognition of the sacrifices that come with serving in the military, the weight of loss that never fully fades, and the unspoken bond that all soldiers share, regardless of the years between them. The guard's eyes were filled with something the veteran had not expected: a deep and quiet respect, a silent acknowledgement of the veteran's journey. It was as if the guard knew that the veteran wasn't just another face in the crowd, that he wasn't just some old man standing there to witness the ceremony. The guard understood that behind the veteran's eyes was a story of battlefields, of comrades lost, of victories and defeats that couldn't be told in just a few sentences. It wasn't the kind of story that could be shared with just anyone. But in that moment, the veteran knew that the guard understood it all. And that meant more than any medal or decoration ever could. The veteran had often wondered if others, especially the younger generation, could ever truly understand the sacrifices that had been made. Over the years, he had witnessed a world that seemed to forget the true cost of freedom. He watched as people went about their daily lives, blissfully unaware of the struggles that had shaped the world they now lived in. It wasn't their fault, of course. How could they know? How could anyone understand unless they had walked those same difficult paths? Yet despite all this, the veteran had never stopped hoping that one day, Someone would understand. And now, as he stood there, his tears still fresh on his cheeks, he realized that perhaps he wasn't alone in his memories after all. The Royal Guard, though still standing stoically, was not just a soldier in uniform. He was a human being, one who, despite the role he played, could see beyond the surface. The veteran understood that being a soldier wasn't just about standing guard or following orders. It was about something deeper, something that transcended the uniform and the training. It was about the experiences shared with others who had served, the bond formed by hardship and the knowledge that, in the end, no matter what rank or position someone held, they were all connected by the same thread. As the veteran stood there, his thoughts began to drift back to his own days in the military. He could still remember the faces of his fellow soldiers, their laughter and camaraderie, the long nights spent in the trenches, and the moments of fear and uncertainty when they weren't sure whether they'd make it through. But it wasn't just the difficult moments that stuck with him. It was the small acts of kindness, the quiet understanding between soldiers who didn't need to speak to know what the other was feeling. He remembered how, on the toughest days, they didn't have to say a word to one another. A glance, a nod, a small gesture. These were enough to communicate everything. The veteran realized that in a way this young Royal Guard had done the same. The guard's subtle shift in posture, his softened gaze, were like a quiet message of solidarity. It was a gesture that spoke volumes. The veteran felt that in that moment he wasn't just a man who had served in the past. He was part of something bigger, a legacy that stretched across generations. A legacy built on respect, sacrifice, and mutual understanding. As the ceremony continued, the veteran felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. The crowd around him still cheered and clapped, but the noise seemed distant now. His mind was focused on something far more important. It wasn't about the ceremony or the Royal Guards anymore. It was about the quiet understanding that had passed between him and the guard, the unspoken bond that no one else had witnessed. For the veteran, it was enough to know that, despite everything he had been through, there were still people who understood, people who cared. The Royal Guard, in his own way, had reminded the veteran of something he had forgotten, that even in the most formal and distant moments, there was still room for humanity. There was still room for kindness, for understanding, and for the silent acknowledgement of shared experiences. And in a world that often seemed too busy, too noisy, and too distant, that reminder was something the veteran would carry with him long after the ceremony was over. The guard hadn't done anything extraordinary. He hadn't spoken a single word. But in that brief exchange, he had offered the veteran something more valuable than any speech or grand gesture. He had offered him the knowledge that no matter how much time had passed, no matter how much the world had changed, there were still people who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and to carry the weight of the past. And for the veteran, that knowledge was a gift that would stay with him forever. This expanded version of Part 2, A Soldier's Silent. Understanding captures the emotional connection and the shared bond between the veteran and the Royal Guard. It's written to be engaging while focusing on human empathy, understanding, and the depth of silent gestures. Let me know if you need further adjustments or additions. The ceremony continued with all the grandeur one might expect, but for the veteran and the Royal Guard, everything had shifted in that single moment of silent understanding. As the veteran stood there, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of appreciation for the guard, a young man who, despite his rigid and formal duties, had found a way to communicate something deeply human. But the veteran didn't expect it to go any further. He was aware of the rules, the protocols. The guard was still, after all, a Royal Guard. The uniform he wore was one of strict formality, and no one could break the silence or the composure expected of them during such a public event. Yet, despite the rules, there was something different in the air now. The veteran stood tall, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He thought about the silence that had hung between him and the guard, the way that brief glance had cut through the distance between them. In that moment, the veteran had felt seen, not just as an elderly man, but as someone who had lived through the same experiences, fought in the same battles, and understood the same losses. The idea of that recognition stirred something deep inside him. It was as though the guard had unlocked a door inside his heart that he had closed many years ago. The feeling was so strong that for a second he considered walking up to the guard, talking to him. But then the veteran hesitated. The moment had passed, and he feared that by breaking the silence, he would ruin the connection they had, this beautiful, unspoken bond But that wasn't the case. As the ceremony moved on, the guard standing at attention seemed to sense the veteran's internal struggle. The veteran watched carefully, noting the guard's movements, his every small shift, and then, unexpectedly, the guard's hand, stiff and unmoving until that moment, began to shift slightly. It was a subtle movement, so small that it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. The guard's fingers twitched, almost as if fighting an inner battle of his own. The veteran watched in silence, trying to read the guard's intentions. What could he possibly be thinking? What was he about to do? Would he ignore the connection they shared, or was something more going to happen? It was then that the guard made his move. With slow, deliberate care, he reached up to his head and took off his ceremonial hat, carefully holding it in his hands. This wasn't just a small shift in posture. It was a gesture, one that spoke volumes. In the midst of the ceremony, in front of all those gathered, the royal guard had removed his hat, an act that would normally be unthinkable during such a formal event. It wasn't just about the hat itself. It was about what it represented. In that single action, the guard had broken the unspoken code that all royal guards lived by, the code that demanded they stand still, unblinking, unmoving, as symbols of strength and unwavering duty. For the veteran, the act was nothing short of powerful. He could feel the weight of it. The guard had, in that moment, put aside the rigid expectations of his role to show something far more important: respect, acknowledgement, and a sense of connection. The veteran could barely hold back his emotions as he saw the guard's hand come away from his hat and then place it gently by his side. It wasn't just a salute or a nod. It was a silent but clear gesture of understanding. In that brief moment, time seemed to stop for the veteran. He stood there, his heart swelling with gratitude. No one else had noticed the gesture, not yet at least. The crowd continued to cheer and clap, lost in the excitement of the ceremony, unaware of the quiet exchange unfolding in front of them. But the veteran knew. He understood exactly what the guard was doing, and it meant more to him than anything else in that moment. For the guard, removing the hat wasn't a simple act of rebellion. It was an acknowledgement of something that couldn't be measured by rank or ceremony. It was an understanding that sometimes the rules we follow, no matter how deeply ingrained, need to be set aside when faced with real, human emotion. The guard, in his uniform and rigid stance, had understood something the veteran had needed: a simple act of recognition. By taking off his hat, the guard was saying in his own quiet way, "I see you. I respect you. I understand you." The veteran, in turn, felt the weight of those words even though they weren't spoken. He thought about the days when he, too, had been a young soldier, standing proudly with his comrades following orders without question. He remembered the strictness of military life, the rules, the discipline, and how they had been drilled into him from day one. He had lived by those rules for years, and in some ways they had shaped him into the person he was. But as he grew older, he realized that there was something more important than the rules: the bonds formed between soldiers, the shared experiences, and the quiet moments that connected them. Now, in his old age, the veteran found himself standing before a young guard who, in one simple act, had reminded him of everything he had once valued: the unspoken bond of soldiers, the respect between those who had served, and the importance of showing kindness and understanding, even when the rules might say otherwise. The veteran wiped away another tear, this time not out of sadness but out of appreciation. He looked at the young guard, still standing tall, his hat by his side. The gesture, so small yet so significant, had made all the difference. It had broken the silence that had existed between them and had opened the door to a deeper understanding. The guard had shown the veteran something he hadn't realized he needed: the simple truth that no matter how much time passed, there would always be moments when people could connect on a level that went beyond formalities and traditions. And so, the ceremony continued, but the veteran's mind was elsewhere now. It was no longer focused on the royal procession or the crowds. It was focused on the quiet, powerful moment that had passed between him and the guard. That single, simple act had reminded him of something important: that soldiers, no matter their rank, their age, or their position, were united by something more than uniforms. They were united by the experiences they had shared, the struggles they had faced, and the silent understanding that no words could ever fully capture. The veteran knew, in that moment, that he would never forget the young royal guard, who had chosen to break the code of silence, not just for the sake of duty, but for the sake of human connection. It was a gesture that transcended time, rank, and ceremony. It was a gesture that spoke to the heart, reminding everyone that even in the strictest of environments there was always room for empathy, for kindness, and for understanding.